Bioshock is one of the most bizarrely unique games to ever see the light of day. But believe it or not, it's something that almost never happened. The real question is, how do you even come up with and arrive at an end product like Bioshock? The short and simple answer is, with a crazy amount of difficulty. Seeing that it recently celebrated its 16th anniversary, here's the insane truth about how Bioshock came into being. Our story begins with the creation of Irrational Games back in 1997. It was founded by three former members of Looking Glass Studios, namely Ken Levine, Jonathan Che, and Robert Fermier. Irrational was a tiny company that consisted of about 20 employees at the time, and the first project they ended up working on was System Shock 2. Although the game ended up receiving critical acclaim, it was a commercial failure, which basically meant a pitch Levine had sent to EA to work on a sequel was ultimately rejected. Irrational would continue to work on other games such as Freedom Force, but Levine was still intent on creating a game that harnessed the same immersive storytelling and dynamics that featured prominently in System Shock 2. This resulted in the creation of the very first demo for what would later turn into Bioshock in 2002. Initially, the game was set on a space station that had become infested with mutant abominations. As such, just about every enemy was inspired directly by B-rate sci-fi movies and had working names such as Jellyman and Eelman. At the outset, the very first iteration of Bioshock was largely unremarkable and a rehash of pretty much everything gamers had seen before. The thing is, the team at Irrational really weren't all that sure what game they actually wanted to make. While they wrestled with this, word got out that a spiritual successor to System Shock 2 was being developed, which led to Jean-Paul Le Breton, one of Bioshock's level designers, applying for a job at Irrational. Lead level designer Bill Gardner would also join the team after hitting it off with Levine while he was shopping at the video game store Gardner worked at. Things were starting to ramp up at Irrational, and for all intents and purposes, momentum for what would become Bioshock gathered at an unprecedented pace. Then in late 2004, Bioshock was officially announced, and as the game shifted into full-scale development, Irrational relocated their operation to a bigger office located in Quincy, Massachusetts. The team consisted of just 6 members during the first year of development, but after 2K acquired the studio in late 2005, the staff complement would grow to 60 members, in part due to funding provided by 2K after the acquisition. While Irrational did its best to maintain a flat hierarchy and encourage collaboration, some serious problems would soon become apparent that would very nearly lead to work on Bioshock ceasing and the project being abandoned forever. The good news is that Bioshock's core gameplay was already in place since the 2002 demo employed 3 different interrelated elements to drive the experience. Drones that carried a certain precious material, protectors that would defend the drones, and harvesters that would attempt to seize the precious materials from the drones. These would later move from generic placeholders to little sisters, big daddies, and splicers in what would eventually become Bioshock. It was actually the core gameplay, even in its raw state, that prompted 2K to take on Bioshock as a project, and God bless them for that. So in further developing the game's setting, the concept shifted from a space station to an abandoned World War II-era Nazi laboratory that had been uncovered by scientists in the 21st century. Over the course of decades, the many experiments that had gone on had evolved into an ecosystem that centered around the 3 aforementioned groups. While the setting would shift again, many of the elements that were included in this version of the game, such as plasmids and Eve, using stealth to bypass security systems, directions through the world provided via radio, bits of lore contained in audio recordings, and the ghosts of dead characters, would all be reworked and form part of what would become the final version of Bioshock. Dissatisfied with the World War II approach, it was finally decided that everything would be set in an undersea world built upon utopian ideals that had descended into chaos and madness. But the real problem here was coming up with a definitive aesthetic for the game, and the art team really struggled at first. In the beginning, levels were pretty generic and populated with creatures that were largely uninspired. The source of this issue was a disconnect between the design and art teams, so Le Breton and Hoagie de la Plante, a recently employed level artist, spent an entire week experimenting with building a unique level. Upon completion, the pair presented their work, which impressed Levine. He showed off the designs to the team, stating that it was the first environment that was on par with a next-generation visual standard. While the success didn't make all the problems go away, it did mean more progress could be made. It was Le Breton who allegedly came up with the idea of introducing mind control as a mechanic. He was inspired by the notion of subliminal messages in 1950s era movies like The Manchurian Candidate and thought this would be a novel way to prevent players from progressing instead of the whole locked doors and keys approach. Hellquist then attempted to think of phrases Atlas could use for mind control. Excelsior was used at first, followed by Cedo Meori, meaning I yield to a greater person. But these were too obvious and lacking in subtlety, so finally the more conversational would you kindly was settled upon. Up to this point, things had gone relatively smoothly at Irrational, but tensions were on the rise when the need arose to put together a demo for Game Informer which was preparing to run a Bioshock cover story. The pressure was on to put together something really impressive, and during discussions surrounding how AI should be demonstrated in the demo, someone referred to System Shock 2's cyborg ninjas. Levine was enraged by this and snarled, "I don't want to hear anything about cyborg ninjas." Hellquist then tried to say something, but before he could, Levine shrieked, "Shut up!" While this outburst was confusing to LeBreton, he got the impression from everyone else who had been there longer than him that this kind of thing had happened before. The thing is, a lot of tension existed between Irrational's initial desire to create a spiritual successor to System Shock 2 and something that would appeal to the masses. After meeting with 2K, Levine informed the team that Bioshock would be marketed as a shooter to attract the Halo crowd. The problem with the game's premise was that it was too philosophical and nerdy for the majority of gamers to appreciate, at least from a marketing perspective, so this shift was more or less universally agreed upon as necessary. It was abundantly clear that Levine was feeling the pressure as he would routinely describe someone at Irrational as being sand in the gears. While it's easy to criticize Levine, even LeBreton admits that there's a huge amount of stress placed on the shoulders of creative directors on big-budget video games. They have to fulfill many roles and have no protections from financial constraints and the expectations of stakeholders, so it really is a difficult position to occupy. And in all truth, while Levine could be caustic or seemingly irrational at times, excuse the pun, he was instrumental in helping to resolve many of the issues related to the game's design and narrative. Another major issue arose concerning Bioshock's little sisters, who basically harvest stem cells from the many dead bodies scattered around Rapture. At first they were grotesque slugs, but then the design shifted to make them little girls. However, players were supposed to prey on them, so the option to be able to save them by performing a kind of exorcism was added into the mix. But regardless, there was little incentive to save a little sister, as the reward players would receive would be far less. And Greg Gobby, the head of 2K, stated that, "We are not shipping a $25 million product where the player gets punished for doing the right thing." And since Bioshock would technically allow you to kill children, there were concerns that the ratings board would tear the game to shreds. A solution to the predicament was sorely needed if Bioshock was to ship, so little sisters were made invulnerable and could only be harvested or saved once their big daddy was dispatched. This did mean altering the game's lore, which LeBreton still cringes about to this day, but given the pressures and need for a solution, this ultimately had to do. Then, during its final year of development, Levine enforced mandatory 6 and then 7-day work weeks, which may have increased productivity but severely affected the team's morale. Moreover, this caused a rift between Hellquist and Levine to grow as the latter began to take more and more control over the design process. Hellquist was routinely shut out of meetings, ostensibly because he was considered non-critical and would impede the decision-making process. Hellquist had challenged Levine on more than one occasion and was, for better or worse, a thorn in his side. So Hellquist departed from Irrational just 2 months after Bioshock's completion. But in spite of all the pressure and relentless work schedule, many at Irrational found the entire process exhilarating, seeing the continuous momentum as something that was admirable and necessary. Bioshock was now nearing its planned completion date, but then 2K announced an additional 3 months to finish the game off. This was something of a relief for Levine, but the prospect of 90 extra days of grueling work was less than appealing to many of Irrational's team members. In reality, it was both a blessing and a curse, as it meant the team could finish off something special, but would of course have to sacrifice even longer to make this a reality. Then in January 2007, a playtest wherein participants reported several pain points caused the team to become particularly worried. But despite the looming deadline, the decision was made to make the necessary improvements to get Bioshock to where it needed to be. Lighting was reworked to make Rapture a little less murky and easier to navigate. The UI and feedback was significantly tweaked. A quest arrow was also introduced, even though many designers deeply disapproved of this move. Atlas was also made Irish, and the whole intro sequence was overhauled so that many images of the ocean were shown, so there would be no confusion as to where Bioshock was set. A huge amount of time and effort went into fine-tuning the game and turning it into a complete, seamless experience. And after 3 additional months of tireless effort, Bioshock was finally completed. On August 21, 2007, Bioshock was launched to universal acclaim. Irrational had done what they at one point must have imagined impossible: create a unique gaming experience complete with original lore, an all-new setting, and a thought-provoking, intelligent narrative. In truth, the team at Irrational were exhausted, and after the game's release and success, many members felt lost, leading to a number of them leaving to carry on with new opportunities. The truth is that game development isn't easy, and making a top-rate title like Bioshock is all the more difficult. What is true is that the story behind Bioshock is still relevant today. In fact, it may be more relevant now than ever before. Most of us are living life with our own needs in mind, but forget there are others around us who might suffer as a result of our thoughtlessness. In a world where greed runs rampant, things are doomed to fail. And if there's anything we know about the world in 2023, there's more greed, corruption, and the desire for power than ever before. Bioshock is a cogent reminder that we need to keep our ambitions in check, and that, no matter how much we try to convince ourselves, the ends more often than not do not justify the means. And so ends this tale of the insane truth behind Bioshock. But what do you think? What does Bioshock mean to you? And do great games always involve a lot of sacrifice from the teams behind them? Let us know in the comments. Smash that like button and subscribe to the channel for daily gaming, VR, and tech content. From me and the crew, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Later!